I think so.
Okay, Frank, thank you so much for joining me. Tell me a little bit about how Reshma Begum, a factory worker in Bangladesh, one individual person, can change her lot.
Well, what Reshma Begum has been doing is really adding legitimacy to the labor movement in Bangladesh. And she has been doing that in the eyes of her fellow factory workers. And the reason that she is able to do this is because she kind of has a unique background. She was in the Rana Plaza building last April when it collapsed, killing over 1,100 factory workers. And she was trapped in there for 17 days before being found. And after she came out, she was kind of a local hero and celebrity of sorts. So now that she is coming out and voicing, listen, we cannot sit idly by anymore. This is not just a fight for adequate pay and humane hours. This is a fight for our lives. This is life and death for us. And by doing that, she's really motivated people to come out and to join the movement. And that's what she's been doing.
Through this movement, has she been able to institutionalize any changes with regards to factory safety in these kind of environments?
So far, there has been small progress made. The biggest success we've seen is an increased participation among workers. And that is the first step in a successful labor movement. We need workers to be on board. We need workers to be pressuring the government, the factory owners to make these changes.
Has she been a spokesperson to the government? Has she been cooperating with the government, talking to the government? Do you foresee her being able to make any change through policy?
Her role right now, the role that she has taken on has solely been to mobilize workers. She has been participating in rallies, speaking in rallies. She has been connecting one-on-one with workers because that is really the.
So this is just limited to workers at this point. You're not dealing with the leadership of the people that have created these problems to begin with.
Reshma's role has been to mobilize workers, yes, to put pressure on the government and to put pressure on the factories.
What do you see as the next step?
The next step, we need to see the government enforce its current policies. We've heard reports of management threatening workers for considering organizing. We need the government to rearrange the organizing laws to make it a little easier for workers to unionize. That would be the next step from this.
And do you see the United States getting involved in this fight?
Right now, the biggest thing that the United States could do, consumers could become more informed on where the goods, where their clothes come from. When you shop for clothes at places like H&M or Walmart, know that a lot of those clothes do come from sweatshops in Bangladesh, and there are a lot of lives going into that.
Right. Okay, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Good to meet you.
Awesome.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Hi.
Oh, sure.
And then you can just put it now, button it back up with that cable underneath.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, there you go. Wow, exactly, so that we don't see it on the TV.
I had no idea there was
Yeah.
stuff that goes
Just
into
put it
it.
right in your pocket like that, boom. Okay? That's it.
Okay.
You look great.
Do I look?
Look at me.
Okay.
Yeah. Pretend like there's no one else, not your entire class full of students watching.
Except that's exactly how I do. I'm very nervous.
Don't be nervous. Ready? So, Senator Smith, you wrote recently about what's happening in the region of Rohingya. What should the U.S. do to help this country at this point?
Well, first of all, hi Ruby, thank you for having me on your show. I think it's really important for the United States to continue to get involved in this effort. It's a really big human rights violation, and I think that ultimately the U.S. Congress should stand behind the sanctions that are in place and probably even motion to further increase the economic sanctions against the Burmese government.
Well, what would you say to what many supporters of President Obama's policy have pointed out, which is that lifting some of these sanctions on Burma has actually helped promote democracy in the country, which is a development we've seen in the last year?
I think to some extent that's true. I think that the Burmese government has certainly begun to be more democratic. However, even despite the signs of democratization and political reform, they've continued discriminatory practices against the Rohingya. So for some of the population, yes, it's certainly more democratic, but for this group of 800,000 people who are living in detention camps, who don't have citizenship rights under law for a country that they've been in for centuries, it's not a democracy for them. So I think as Americans, we have to promote democracy for all, not just for some.
And you've partnered with a Democratic member of Congress on this op-ed.
That's right. This is certainly a bipartisan issue. These are the truths that our country holds self-evident, and I think that it can have wide support across Congress.
We've seen a hesitancy on the part of the United States so far to get involved in other human rights crises, as you could call them, in other parts of the country. Why is this different?
I think this is different because it's something that we've already taken a stand on. We already have these sanctions in place, and all I'm asking is that we do not repeal them until they've made some serious consideration of their human rights violations, and that if they don't, that we should take into account putting back some of the ones that we've repealed recently.
Do you think that it's likely that the administration will take a stand on this issue?
I don't know if the administration can take a stand, but I know as a member of Congress, and I know that my fellow Congress members, we each have a stake in this, and we could do something. The American people themselves can do something. They can encourage their congressmen, their senators, House of Representatives to take a stand against this. It doesn't have to be an either or. I think that as Congress, there is some power that we have to actually really make a change here.
Even though we haven't seen basically anything go through Congress this year, it's gridlocked. No.
Well, it is something that's going to come up, and like I said, I don't think that this is an issue that's polarizing. It's a very bipartisan issue, as you can see from the op-ed. So I think that it's something that we can all stand for: human rights, the right of people to live somewhere in sanitary conditions, the right of a citizen of the country to be protected under the law. I don't think that's something that any American would disagree with.
The sanctions, lifting the sanctions against Myanmar, Burma rather, has been one of Secretary Hillary Clinton's success stories of her first term. Do you think that she should come out and take a stand on what you call a genocide in this piece?
I think that for Hillary, I think that she should rethink some of the things that she's done, but she's no longer in that position, so I think we should really be trying to pivot to the people who are responsible at this point. So that would be the new Secretary of State, John Kerry, that would be the members of Congress. So I think she did what she thought was right at the time, and now that we have this new information, especially the human rights report that have said that there have been 4 mass grave sites uncovered in the past year, she probably didn't have that information, but now with the information that we do have, it's important that we take a stand.
Okay, Senator, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ruby. It's very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
I should do it, right? I don't want to. That was scary.
Awesome. Good job.
It was terrifying. Ruby, you are hard.
No. You were good.
Thank you.
You have good eye contact.
Thank you. I just figured I either look at you or look down at my paper. I was nervous, so I was going to pick you.
Who's next?
That's better. The paper's worried.
Yeah. I was like, uh-oh. Can't look at these.
Yeah, you were fine.
Thank you.
So you don't have to. Now we can put someone else out.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Okay, and we'll just keep that in your lap when you sit down.
Hi.
I'm Kate.
Ruby, nice to meet you. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Tell me about this initiative. Why should Americans care if Saudi Arabian women can drive?
Well, first of all, I want you to picture yourself, a typical American citizen living in average American suburb, going about life without the ability to drive. You know, you have to get to work, you have to go pick the kids up from school, run errands, all of these things that you rely on your car for, or public transportation, which you might also be banned from using. What would you do in this typical life without a car? How would you go about day-to-day life without the freedom to get from place to place? And you know, this is the reality of millions of Saudi Arabian women today in Saudi Arabia who are banned from driving, mostly banned from public transportation use as well, and must go about their day-to-day lives. And as Ford, a company that makes automobiles, this is not acceptable to us that a country that are millions of people are banned from enjoying the use of our cars and products, and we think that no global country, company, or citizen should support this ban.
Is this facing other countries as well?
It's not. It's only in Saudi Arabia, so it's only Saudi women that are banned from driving in the world.
And for a country that imposes inequality on women in so many other ways, why is this the issue that you think can actually make a difference?
There are many reasons. First of all, King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia promised to end the ban about 5 years ago and has yet to do so. And there's been a massive uprising, especially amongst women, protesting, demonstrations, even filming themselves in their cars and posting them to YouTube to show themselves empowered in this way. And I think, and Ford thinks that freedom of movement is something that's really fundamental to freedom in a society. It's the ability to get yourself from place to place, but it's also the ability to be an active member of that society. And this is something that the women of Saudi Arabia are calling out for and that we should support.
Ford is one company. Have you seen support from other car companies? Have you seen support from the U.S. government?
Not directly, but Ford has the remarkable ability to represent American interests around the world in ways that can have real leverage. So Ford and other top American car companies are actually considering right now opening up production plants in Saudi Arabia. And this is something that we said we will not do in Saudi Arabia until the ban is lifted and until all citizens...
Is that really enough incentive?
The Saudi Arabia government has been really adamant and encouraging of our opening the production plant there. And if every American company, whether it be cars or any product, insisted in the country that it's producing them or selling them, that all citizens have the equal right to enjoy that product, it could have a real effect.
And tell me again, how much support are you seeing from the government?
The government right now, we're in private talks with them, so I can't give too much of that information away. But I know that if American consumers stand behind us on this, and the American government as well, as we are supportive of the women and citizens of Saudi Arabia, we can make a real difference.
Okay, Alan, thank you so much for joining me.
Alan?
That's your name in this thing.
Oh, that's weird.
Sorry,
Don't worry
that was a
about
little
it.
weird for me.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Do me a favor, wait till I go into the control room and just frame them up.
Oh, yeah,
Stuff going-
sorry.
No, because I just,
Okay.
I'll let you know I'll talk to you yesterday.
Oh, you'll talk to me?
Could you possibly just put that underneath your shirt right there? Is this?
I don't-
Put it right underneath and bring it up to about.
I don't know, it's fine.
No, bring it up to the shirt. Yeah. Is that just a one?
Okay.
Okay, and in that case, what we can do is this.
But anyway, you let it go.
Okay. Okay. Is this okay?
So what we can do is this. Let's just move your hair here for a second. Yeah.
Okay.
Just if you, hey, but you're doing great.
You can have a seat. And I'll put it, no, have a seat. And I'll put it right behind you.
Okay.
There you go. I'll talk to you on the speakers here when we're ready. Let me just frame them
Okay.
up, okay? Give me 1 second. What's your name?
Monty?
No, what's your name?
Ruby.
Ruby?
Yeah. Hi.
Nice to meet
Nice
you.
to meet you. We have to wait apparently until he's done.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining me. I really
Thank you.
appreciate it. Tell me a little bit about this initiative. Why, with such high crime rates, for example, with such turmoil in this country, should South Africa be hosting the Olympics?
I think the Olympic Games is for all human beings, not just for Western people, Asian people. It should be participated by everyone in the world. But without one single Olympic Games hosted by the African country, we think it's really a pity of the all human beings. So we really think it's a great opportunities to bring the Olympic Games to the Africa.
And I mentioned the crime rates. Do you see the violence in that area as a problem?
Yes, it's a big challenge for any city in the world to host the Olympic Games. Imagine that about 1 million foreigners suddenly swarming into a city will definitely generate the security issues. I think every hosting cities must be prepared for such event. Like even the most safety place like London, New York, without preparation, chaos or any bad events may happen. So plan is the most important things. And moreover, imagine that there are over 40 million of people live peacefully in South Africa. And South Africa has hosted the Rugby World Cup and the Soccer World Cup 2010. Both events were successful. So I don't think it's like obstacle for South Africa to host the Olympic Games.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the World Cup because that was just in 2010. Why now, just not too long after that, should South Africa be the home to one of the world's biggest sporting events again?
Yeah, as you mentioned, that is World Cup. World Cup is only for soccer and the soccer fans, but we think Olympics it has a more broader views of sports, including every sports like swimming, like ball games. So it's much more like than just one sport. We want to bring more fans of sports into Africa, not just the soccer games.
And you said you see this as a symbolic gesture that would give a country not in the West a big event. Can you expand on that? Why does South Africa in particular need this? Why? What is the symbolism?
Yes, it's like take all the African peoples join into the whole Olympic events. And I think it's sorry.
That's okay. What would it mean to the African people?
To host the Olympic Games is much more than just participate the Olympics in another continent. So it makes the African people proud and recognize their identities and prove their abilities in the world.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sorry. Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you.
Next victim.
What's that? Your notes? Well, I don't know. What do you think? Good. You can put your notes on your lap. The camera isn't framed to see below your right here, so you can just leave it on your lap if you like. Just here's no, just put it in your lap. Thanks.
All right, I think we're ready to go.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
Tell me what Bangladesh would gain from overhauling the garment industry.
That's a great question, especially given the problems that Bangladesh is currently facing. Bangladesh has used its textile industry basically to modernize its economy. To give you an idea, Bangladesh is a country the size of Wisconsin and with 150 million people. So its textile industry has actually been very pivotal for building its economic and development platform. It accounts for about 80% of its exports. So what do we mean by modernizing? I would like to give an idea to the people that are actually listening to our show of what this actually means. This actually means two things. First of all, what modernizing means is investing in the skills of the workers so as to be able to have a sustained growth for the future. And secondly, invest in infrastructure. And by that we mean more practical things. We mean roads, we mean electricity, we mean the actual facilities that will help the development of this industry. Now, given the two problems that I spoke about before that Bangladesh is currently facing, the first one being inflation, given that it's a developing economy, and secondly, its demographic problem, we believe that investing in these two areas that I mentioned.
When you say demographic problem, what do you mean?
It's an aging population. So far, a lot of the emerging markets, so-called, Bangladesh being one of them, have used the fact that they have a very big population and at the same time very low wages, have used it as a platform to develop. So the fact that Bangladesh is currently facing a demographic problem means that unless we provide skills, provide training to these factory workers, which right now are the basis for the manufacturing industry, then 10 years from now, and actually that's what the economists have projected, that according to the levels, the amount of training that is going in these current workers right now, Bangladesh will not be able to profit from this industry that, let me remind you, it's 80% of its exports. So the manufacturing base right now is not having the right skills, it's not equipped enough. So in the future, it will not be trained enough to be able to sustain this growth. And that is very problematic because the people will not be able to move and ascend into the middle class. And a lot of the companies that right now base their manufacturing, have their manufacturing bases in Bangladesh, will actually move to cheaper places, like places in Africa. And that very much links to the inflation issue, which I told you before. It's an emerging market, so that means that people are getting more opportunities. And this translates into rising prices, rising living costs.
And I don't mean to interrupt, but it's clearly a problem, which you've outlined. What can you actually do without intervening in this country's government to make change? I mean, how can you find success here?
That's a great question, because our role here and the role of my organization is actually to strengthen the union. So we believe that providing people with this skill and the training and giving them more skills and investing in their future will actually make the country more independent. So we don't believe in intervention. What we believe in providing these people with the proper skills that, given the economic outlook of the country, they will be able not just to benefit from what is currently happening, from all these opportunities that all these big companies that are going into their country are helping them, but also to eventually not be a sweatshop, so-called country, but to be able to develop into something a little bit more sophisticated, because that's the more sustainable model for growth. And we believe that Bangladesh definitely has that potential.
Okay, sorry we don't have more time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right here.
Awesome, good job. Were you hearing me in the speakers to say that?
No, I don't have an earphone, but he was.
No, I was saying it in the speakers. Maybe I just muted it. It's probably what. What's up, man? Hi. Good. Awesome. Put that right in your.
Pocket?
Yeah, that's fine. No, you put it right in there.
in the
Yeah,
pocket.
it's totally fine. All right, cool. Give me one sec. Sure.
Good to go.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Can you describe for us the status of the Rohingya in Myanmar, and and tell us what obstacles these people are facing right now.
Sure. I would define the status of the Rohingya in Myanmar miserable at best, perhaps. These people have no citizenship rights in a country that is supposedly democratic, which is Myanmar. They have to face very remarkable restrictions to their freedom. If they want to travel, they need to receive government authorization. They cannot have more than 2 children, for instance, and they lack access to basic basic services like healthcare, or education, and ultimately there is widespread malnutrition, and all of this is happening in a country that is supposedly democratic, as I said.
Right. And this is a country that the U.S. has held up as a success story. Do you see that as a problem?
I think that Myanmar is on the way to becoming a success story. It is not fully successful yet, because there have been a change from dictatorship to democracy in the past few years. But I believe that the process of democratization is something that doesn't occur from a day to the other. It's a process. It takes time. So I think that...
Is a genocide really part of the process of democratization?
Absolutely not. But I believe that the values of democracy, in order to stick within a country, within a region in general, have to grow and have to start at some point, and then with time, like the country will eventually get there. Does this justify the condition of the Rohingya in Myanmar? Absolutely not. And that is why I believe that foreign governments have to keep pressuring the Burmese government in order to improve the situation of the Rohingya population.
How instrumental is Aung San Suu Kyi in this?
Aung San Suu Kyi has been quite disappointing, I would say. She is considered one of the champions of human rights globally. She won a Nobel Peace Prize in 1991. And she is considered the champion of human rights in Myanmar. As I said, it's been very disappointing that she has not made even one comment in favor of the Rohingya or of a substantial change of their condition. So
President Obama is one leader who has sat beside her and, like you said, held her up as a bastion of democracy.
Sure.
Do you think that he needs to say something about her silence on this issue?
I mean, President Obama is as well a Nobel Peace Prize, and people make mistakes. So I believe that President Obama should definitely pressure, more than Aung San Suu Kyi, the government of Myanmar. He is the president of the United States, the beacon of democracy all over the world. And I believe that it's his job to promote human rights globally.
Okay, David, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Good. You're gonna walk over to the mic.
Yeah.
We need that.
There you go.
Thanks.
Very nice. A lot of confidence in that interview right there. A lot of confidence.
Do you really think so? I was like, wanted to shoot myself at some
I'm
point.
gonna put this microphone on you real quick.
I'm not sure where to put it.
Right here is
With
good.
all these.
I'm just gonna put that right in your pocket.
One thing you'd wanna just make sure is that you're fine, but I mean, he's done it for you, but if you're ever doing it yourself, you wouldn't want fabric to be rubbing against the microphone.
Your lapel, if you wear a
Yeah, it'll be
jacket,
fine.
that's perfect right there.
That's okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Great. Okay, great.
Okay. Hi, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Tell me, how can we increase political representation of women in the Middle East right now?
That's a great question, because actually now in the Middle East women movement where I work, we emphasize this idea, and we are trying to work hard on this in the representation of women in the parliaments, especially that the political atmosphere in the Arab countries now is towards pushing women to be represented. And also the parliament elections in Egypt, Tunisia, and Lebanon is coming, and we need to push for this. And the key word actually, and the key player in this issue is the political parties. They have to do their role, and we are now trying to reach them, and we try to talk to them to have women represented and to include women in their election lists.
You wrote recently, though, in an op-ed that this should be the role of women institutions and NGOs. What did you mean by that, and how do you see NGOs specifically exerting any real viable political power to change policy?
That's a good question, because women actually in the Arab world need the support of the public, and the public is represented in the NGOs and the movements and the groups. So now we are trying to work with the NGOs and with other social groups to support women through giving her the chance to be represented in the parliament, also supporting her to go for the elections, also building the skills of the women, and try to improve her capacities to be able to be a successful representatives in the parliament.
You focus quite a bit on Egypt since you're based there.
Yeah.
Tell me how the current political turmoil, what we saw last summer rather, how that has affected the women's movement there. Have you seen actually that being moved back at all? Have you seen it improve since Morsi was taken out of power?
Actually, after the revolution, and after especially that the revolution had a great demand regarding equality and women participation, and after the participation, the active role that women played in the revolution, we were expecting to have women to be more represented and to have more rights. But unfortunately, after the revolution, and especially after the Muslim Brotherhoods lead the political situation in Egypt, we found that women's situation is declining. And especially in the last parliament elections, the women representation was only 2%, which is actually so bad. So we try to work with the NGOs now and with the political parties now to convince them to add women to their lists, and to emphasize the role of women and to have it represented equally in the parliaments.
Do you see the United States as playing a large role in this movement, and has the United States done enough?
To be fair, actually, the U.S. Government played an important role before the revolution. I mean, the role of the government of the U.S. was only before and during the revolution. But after the revolution, unfortunately, they haven't supported women in the Middle East, and they only support they only focus on the political issues. They don't give enough attention to women in these days.
Okay, thank you so much. That's all we have time for. Appreciate
Thank you
it.
so much. Thank you for having me in this show. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're good. I'll take that, or this guy will, actually.
Did you hear me that time in there?
I didn't, but Michael has been saying it, so it's okay. It's not a big deal.
Is it just low?
No, it's not on. I hear you. Really? Just put that in your front pocket. Too.
Great, thank you.
Go for it.
Okay, I just need 1 minute.
That my op-ed.
Yeah.
Are you hearing me now in the studio?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Okay. Well, whenever you're ready, Ruby.
Okay. David, thank you so much for joining us. You recently wrote an op-ed. Can you describe for me what you're advocating for with regard to the Olympics and what you describe as the high price tag on the games. What are you advocating for here?
Well, I'm advocating for the International Olympic Committee to kind of refocus their efforts on getting back to what the games were really founded on, and that's sports and humanity. Unfortunately, the Olympic Games have kind of spiraled out of control from a cost standpoint, and have, through the bidding process, which is a 10-year process and incredibly costly for cities to participate in, has really crowded out cities across the African continent in becoming real competitors to host the Olympic Games.
And why should Africa, which seems to be what you're focusing on, be the next host?
Well, I think mostly because the World Cup coming to South Africa really demonstrated that there is space for international sporting events to come to the continent, and I'm really approaching this more from a development standpoint. I'm a student at Columbia's School of International and Public Affairs, and we're studying a lot of content around market-based approach to development. And while many will argue that the games costing maybe $5 billion upwards to $10 billion could be reallocated in a more constructive way, I'm arguing that this market-based approach, engaging the economy to generate value, is a really good opportunity to generate wealth and income and job security on the continent.
So give me some examples. What did we see from the World Cup coming to South Africa in 2010? How much did that really help the country?
That's a great question. I think in two ways. I mean, there was very tangible economic benefits. There's several stadiums that were built. F&B Stadium, which is in Soweto, has really raised the profile of townships of South Africa's developing communities. The stadium, up until today, is still used for really high-profile events. Eminem actually just performed, I think, last night at F&B Stadium. So these are assets that the country can continue to leverage to generate income.
And do you see the United States as a player in sort of advocating for this? Obviously, we've had our own bids for Olympic Games, but do you think that we should be a leader in doing the kind of work that you're talking about?
I certainly do. I think that's going to be challenging. Chicago bid for 2016 and lost. They spent $100 million in doing so. So that might be a good place to start. I think, yes, the answer is yes.
Okay, David, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks. This, yeah. Is it okay? Okay.
It's a pocket. Wow. I'm already having fun.
Right,
Okay, good.
How are you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you? Okay. Joseph, thank you. Jane. Must have been a last minute change.
Yeah,
We're gender neutral here?
We decided not to try to impersonate a male.
Okay.
So she's gonna be.
I would have to speak in a very deep voice. Yeah. I'll be
Okay, so Jane. Excuse me.
That's fine.
How do the hipsters of New York, which you wrote about recently, relate to the garment industry in Bangladesh?
That's a great question. Just as some side information for viewers at home, recently me and my brother Joseph wrote a op-ed in the New York Times titled "Hipsters, Today's Human Rights Hypocrites." And the idea there was to provide a sort of tongue-in-cheek new perspective on some of the situations in the garment industry in Bangladesh. And the idea of that was that there is a lot of static conversation happening now as to changes that need to be made in Bangladesh for laborers in the textile manufacturing industry. And we believe that there is a responsibility of American consumers to start being more informed about where their clothes and their products are coming from. So this op-ed was intended to be just a very straightforward implication, playful implication that we all have a responsibility to regard the individuals working in Bangladesh in bad conditions as persons that we should protect, and that if we don't actually act on the knowledge that we have that there are labor rights abuses happening there, then we're part of the problem.
Well, so you're advocating for, as you said, these people to regard the problems that are going on in Bangladesh, but what can we actually do? What is it enough to stop buying from these companies? What more? There must be more.
That's another great question, because it is a very complicated solution that we would need to create, and it's definitely not as simple as.
And when you say we, who do you mean?
We, meaning everybody, you and myself, and the populations of young consumers that we have in the United States, and everybody in between. So it's like a global community issue. So we, all of us, should be educating ourselves and then changing our practices in terms of what we consume. However, like you imply, it's not as simple as each individual maybe making those changes, but instead us as a larger consumer body communicating to some of these companies that we trust to deliver us products that don't come with a bill of human rights violations. And I think that we should start communicating with one another as to how to make that a dynamic transition, but there's no clear solution as of yet.
You seem to have articulated this, the approach to this problem as consumer-driven.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to the companies, get them to change their policies. Other people looking at this issue have advocated for a union-based, worker-driven movement.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think this would be better? Or do you think that we should be doing both?
We definitely should be doing both. I think that with this complicated problem, we can afford to throw as many solutions at it as possible.
Isn't that disorganized, though?
Oh, absolutely.
All of the above.
Solution building always is so disorganized. And I think that the benefit even of that disorganization is that there will be an onslaught of demands to these companies to make some changes. And I think that while as a consumer, I might not be able to communicate with multinationals directly or with policymakers in Bangladesh or in the United States, as a consumer, I'm able to very quickly and easily communicate exactly what it is that I am willing to pay for and not. So that's just definitely one side of a much larger solution that me and my colleagues and everyone is working towards.
Okay, Jane, thank you so much.
Great.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Oh, huh. Ha.
Ha.
Oh, you need to give your mic to the guy who's gonna be coming.
Or the gal.
Or the gal. Well, the guy.
Appreciate that. Thank you for that.
I think I have it.
Okay, you do.
Am I getting, why?
No, no, you're
Oh,
fine.
okay,
Just
okay.
know if you have it. Just
Yeah, I
know
have
if
it.
you Good.
Thanks.
Hi.
Whenever you're ready, Ruby.
Okay. Molly, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, thank you.
You're the author of Failed Policies, Forgotten People. We all know your work very well. Tell me why you focused on Rohingya. What can activists like you do to help the people suffering there?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question and a very relevant question right now. First and foremost, we have to have international community. We need to get that community to apply pressure onto the government of Myanmar. And how do you do that? Well, step one is by putting pressure on your own government. And so I'm calling for, I suggest that constituents, people in America should push their own representatives to support what now currently in Congress is the Resolution 418 that essentially presses for an end of the persecution.
And do you see a lot of support for this resolution so far?
I have actually, there are a number of co-sponsors of the resolution. It's bipartisan. It's not a polarizing issue. This is a pretty simple and comprehensible issue, as it is just fundamentally one of persecution.
And would you define this, what's happening in Myanmar, as genocide?
Yes, yeah, without question. You have these premeditated and violent acts of aggression at best, and then at worst, it's murder. There have been instances of young children and women. Mostly it's the Arakanese who seem to be perpetrating the violence against the Rohingya, and it started back in 2012 and has been constant.
The democratization movement there, it's been held up as a success story by the United States, by President Obama, by Secretary Clinton when she was in office. Do you see that as hindering in any way the success of the movement that you're talking about? How does that complicate things?
Right, well, I wouldn't call it a success right now. I think that's important. I think that Myanmar is emerging out of a state of dictatorship. We don't know what it is right now. Certainly we can celebrate that they're trying to take off the yoke of dictatorship, but right now it's not democracy. We're hoping it'll get that way, but we can't reasonably call it a success story when you have an ethnic minority in the country that is systematically denied citizenship and as a result are denied their human rights.
And what at this point is holding this bipartisan effort back from being successful? I mean, what opposition to it have you seen so far, and why? Where is that coming from?
Yeah, I wouldn't say there's necessarily opposition in those terms so much as it seems to lack saliency with the American public. And so the important step is to connect for people who don't necessarily in their everyday lives have to deal with ethnic persecution. Why is this important to me? So
how do you do that?
I think you do it through stories. You do it through awareness. Certainly, you get the word out. Let people know. Certainly, I would say that a lot of the American public might not even know about the Rohingya. So that's important.
Okay, Molly. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Do I just take this off here?
Sure. I'll take it.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thanks. Okay. Michael, thank you so much for joining me. Could you start by telling me and the viewers at home how the 17,000 disenfranchised people can change policy in Lebanon?
Sure. So the 17,000 that you're referring to are actually a group of people affected by citizenship bias, which exists in Lebanon. And as a result of their mothers marrying foreign men, they are denied equal access to education, employment, political representation, as well as freedom of travel. Now, the way in which I would encourage them to overcome this bias and the discrimination they're facing is by coming together to form a social movement. And together they can share the problems that they face, and they can work together and make sure that this is a problem which becomes aware amongst political leaders, civil leaders, and religious leaders as well. Now, no doubt...
Social movement, what does that mean? It sounds like a sort of wishy-washy term almost. What does it really mean?
So a social movement in the context of the Middle East, which we have seen very much recently through the Arab Spring, is people coming together to advocate for the causes that they believe in. And it's much more organized than we have seen in the past.
So you mean a revolution?
The revolution's a very strong word, and I'm talking about something that's much more peaceful than that. So no doubt there will be partners for progress and opponents for the opposition as well. But nevertheless, I think that we can work in a way where we can convince them of the problems that exist and demonstrate that actually by having a two-tier society, which we now have, we are creating a country which does not allow everyone to participate and contribute to the most. And as a country which has been through civil war, it really knows what it's like to have a divided society. And that's not something that we can have again. So revolution is a very strong word, but I don't think that's quite what we're dealing with here. Nevertheless, we do have quite serious problems which don't need to exist. When you look at the neighbouring countries in the region, they don't have this. They have already passed legislation to ensure that there is equal citizenship rights for women and men. And actually that is something which is enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other international conventions.
Your mother was personally affected by this. How has this impacted you and your family?
So I myself have struggled to get into medical school because I am not seen as an equal Lebanese citizen. And my father, who is an engineer, had similar problems in terms of employment. And in terms of my sister, she has actually got concerns that, well, if I fall in love with a man who isn't Lebanese, what impact will that have on my future family? So it does have very serious consequences. And imagine if this was a case or a problem that you faced yourself. You would be quite daunted by the prospects that would happen down the line. And I'm sure you yourself would aim for change as well.
And how much support have you seen from the international community?
So this actually does fit into a bigger picture of women's rights as a whole, which is a much larger issue and not just, a problem in Lebanon. So there is that definite aspect to it where we are seeing support there as well. And as I say, there have been successful movements in neighbouring countries, including Yemen and Morocco and Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So we can look at the support that they were able to receive, and they themselves were able to offer support too.
You cited the Arab Spring as a model almost of what you're trying to do here. A big part of that was the use of social media and the internet. Mm-hmm. Do you see those tools factoring into what you're trying to do in Lebanon?
Definitely, it's a great way of gaining people's attention and also creating discourse on this issue. Because something that's very important here is that we are talking about a very diverse group of people. We're talking about, young and old, rich and poor, also different areas of the country as a whole. And social media is a great way of bringing those people together so that they can communicate together, which otherwise would not necessarily be possible.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much, Michael. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oops. Hidden. Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
You just put that right up your sweater. Awesome. Thanks. And just put that in your lap when you sit down.
Okay. Fine. Okay. Hi, thank you so much for joining me. You are the spokesperson for the Johannesburg 2024 committee. Could you tell me why South Africa should be the next host of the Olympics?
Well, thanks, Ruby, first off, for having me on your show. South Africa would make an excellent host for the 2024 Olympic Games, mainly because we have the experience and the expertise and infrastructure, importantly, to be able to host a large, world-class sporting event. As you know, we successfully hosted the World Cup in 2010. We have a large influx of visitors every year, tourist visitors, and so we really feel that we have much of the infrastructure already in place to successfully host the Games.
What are the challenges that you see facing the bid to get the next Olympics? Why wouldn't it be you?
Well, to be honest with you, we would a South African bid would be historic. We would be the first African country to be able to host the Olympic Games. So that in itself is historic and is a challenge in and of itself. But we believe that we are well prepared. Since our last bid in 2004, we have made tremendous strides. As I mentioned, we have the infrastructure in place now. We have a very solid economy. We have the resources and access to the resources, importantly, to be able to drum up the investment to to stage the Olympic Games.
You have about half the venues you need. How would you finance the rest of building the infrastructure you need, putting the safety and security measures in place? How do you is this a country that's prepared to fund the rest of this?
Absolutely, and South Africa is one of the emerging BRICS economies. We are very much connected to the international financial markets. We do have a solid economy and the resources to partially finance much of this infrastructure, and then of course we would look to tapping into our network of international investors to be able to support the rest. But as I mentioned, we have already actually invested $3 billion today in infrastructure just for the World Cup, and so of course we believe that we are ideally positioned to be able to raise the rest of the capital needed.
And you said you see this as symbolic. Africa has obviously never been a host in a country to the Olympics. What would it mean to the entire continent and the country of South Africa?
Absolutely. I think that South Africa would be really honored to be able to host the Games and feel a sense of African pride, really, to be able to do this for our continent. This has been a really long time coming. We've bid for the Games before, so I think this would be really historic and mean so much to this generation and generations to come.
And you hosted the World Cup, like you said, in 2010. Did you see any problems? Did that go smoothly? Do you see anything you could do to improve next time you do eventually host one of the world's largest sporting events?
That's a great question because we believe that the Games were hosted, the World Cup I should say, was hosted very successfully, but of course there are always improvements that can be made, and we will look back to look on best practices that we can bring forward, and also some of the challenges that we had that we might want to work on. But in general, we had very few security issues. Really the event went without a hitch, and so we want to build on that success in 2024.
Okay, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. I was like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, you can put it on front of your lap.
Hi. Okay. Nancy, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Ruby.
So tell me, how can the garment industry improve?
So I think the major issue that the garment industry worldwide is facing is a very poor working condition, especially in developing countries. And that is an issue that the garment industry has been facing for the longest time. And then it is sad that we've been hearing global brands pledging to actually work on improving workers' condition, improving their safety issues, but only after each and every aftermath of big tragedies. And then nothing much happened in terms of real action until now that we're currently looking at a lot of global brands coming together, trying to actually harness a collective action through a pact that they call the Bangladesh Safety Accord on Fire Safety. Mm-hmm.
Why would this be any different from the other initiatives that we've seen in the past that, like you said, have failed?
Sure. The issue that we saw from the past actions were because they were taken in very much fragmented fashion, but as a collective in a collective manner today, we can actually see that global multinationals actually have a lot of power in terms of working with government and actually have a stronghold in improving worker safety.
Is this the first coordinated effort?
This is the first coordinated effort.
And do you see that as, and when will we see whether or not this is successful or not?
That's a very good question. And then what we see is, sadly, America is actually one of the countries that lack the most in terms of adhering to this accord. We've seen a lot of European labels actually moving very fast in terms of signing the accord, but the American labels have been
very, very slow in terms of adopting
Can you give me an
this.
example of some of the big brands?
Sure. We can see, say, Gap, and then Walmart, and then as well Nike. They have refused to actually provide compensation for the families of the latest tragedy that happened in Bangladesh. And that is kind of a shame because it's quite tragic because the government of United States actually donated DNA kits for families of the victims to identify their loved ones who were victims of the tragedy, and then to actually get compensation from the labels. But at the same time, U.S. labels are actually refusing to pay that compensation.
Right. And why do you think it's been the American companies that have been resistant? What do you see as the problem? What is the holdup?
So the holdup is also more on the U.S. legal sort of framework itself. What we're seeing is for a U.S. company to actually pay, say, compensation for families of the victims, it will actually signal to the world that they are doing something wrong and that they can actually be held responsible in the United States for those actions. So for them to actually giving that gesture is a sign of, yes, we did something wrong, and we would...
Giving what gesture?
Giving gesture of remunerating the families.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And do you see the government as playing a role in getting the U.S. companies to do what you're describing?
I would say so. And then I would say another big factor for this to happen from sort of the U.S. side is also the American Apparel and Footwear Association, because 90% of U.S. brands are actually under the umbrella of the association. And we would say that they would be the one to actually push all of their members to sign the accord.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much for your time. Thanks.
Thank you.
Going really smoothly.
What?
We're almost done.
Are we almost done?
I thought we were going to be. I thought it was going to be long.
Should I go a little bit over? What?
What's that? You can go a little over.
Okay.
Will you chat with us afterwards?
Yeah, of course.
And then we'll go.
Okay. Whoa. They are good. Some of them are good. Although it's hard to be contentious with them because they're all aid worker. Like what? I don't know. What? I am trying.
The light in the dark, I couldn't see the devil.
Yeah, I know, it can be a little misleading.
Okay. Caroline, thank you so much for joining me. Tell me a little bit about what Saudi Arabia would gain by allowing women to drive.
Thanks, Ruby. I'm thrilled to be here. I see three main benefits for Saudi Arabia. The first is that it could gain credibility and potentially leverage in the international community. The fact that Saudi Arabia is the only country in the world that does not allow women to drive makes it a bullseye for criticism from countries throughout the world. Another benefit is Saudi Arabia has the power now to kind of guide its destiny. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of social unrest within the country, and there's the beginnings of a tidal wave of support for women's rights and their right to drive. And if Saudi Arabia the government doesn't listen to its citizens and its demands, it may risk its very own Arab Spring. And then the third benefit, I think, is it would make the economy overall more productive. Women could enter the workforce more readily, contribute financially to their families, and save money that otherwise would be spent to hire drivers, which is what they currently do to overcome the ban. But the one thing I do want to mention is, these benefits are definitely pretty persuasive, but we have to remember the most important element of this conversation, which are the Saudi women themselves. And we're talking about women here and their ability to claim their fundamental human rights, specifically a right to mobility.
I mean, imagine for a second if you couldn't drive, if every time you wanted to drive, you had to ask your husband permission to go to the doctor, to go to the bank, to take your child to school. It's something we definitely take for granted here, and I think the there's a lot of human rights at stake, and Human Rights Watch is committed to making those known.
Well, at what point, and I'll ask you to sort of expand on this, but at what point are you encouraging human rights, and at what point are you imposing on the sovereignty of a country and the way that they've lived their lives? Where is the line there?
So I think one critical distinction to make is, as a researcher at Human Rights Watch, we are highlighting what we see as human rights violations, but this movement is really coming from within the country, from within Saudi Arabia. There's been recent protests, men joining women to drive, and there's really a tide of support growing from within the country. And I think as a human rights organization from the outside, we can support grassroots activists, help them get the word out.
But do you need outside pressure, outside support to actually make public policy change within the country? I mean, how long has this movement been going on with no tangible results?
Yeah, I think that there's evidence that it's going to happen. King Abdullah,
what will happen?
That the driving ban will be removed. King Abdullah has recently, there's this perception that removing the driving ban is a very radical notion, but in reality, it's very consistent with Saudi policy. King Abdullah has recently created a stronger domestic violence law, opened up education and employment opportunities for women, even given women the right to vote starting in 2015. So there is a cultural shift happening in the country, and I think it's only, there's only good to come in the near future.
Is it only a matter of time, or will you make it sound like this will just happen naturally, like within a wave of other changes?
So I think that there's evidence that it's going to happen very soon. For example, this recent op-ed by Ibrahim al-Bulahi, he is a member of the Shura Council, which is the highest advisory body to King Abdullah. He has typically been a very conservative member who has supported the driving ban, but he has really crossed the aisle, and I think this is very significant, and he is now coming out and publicly saying that there's a lot of benefits and more big picture macro things that Saudi Arabia needs to consider when discussing the driving ban and considering repealing it.
Driving is just one small part of everyone's day. Yeah. Why do you see this as something that would open the gates to more monumental change?
Right. Well, as I mentioned before, freedom to mobility is a fundamental human right, but it's really you're right, it is just one manifestation of this greater society of male guardianship over women. And, mobility allows you to access your right to health, being able to make decisions for yourself. Right now, women need men's permission to get surgery. Being able to choose your type of employment. Right now, women need permission from their male guardian. So these are things that get at the really core of what you would define as human rights.
Okay, Caroline, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Oh. I can't see. I don't think so.
Awesome. Thanks. Have fun. You ready, Ruby?
Okay, just give me 1 second. Maggie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me.
What would Africa gain by hosting the Olympics?
Well, as we close up on Sochi, we look forward to the 2016 Olympics in Rio. And this is going to be a landmark event because they are the first games to be hosted in South America. And we would like to continue on this path of inclusion by bringing the Olympics to Africa, because Africa has a lot to gain in terms of long-term economic development, infrastructure, and tourism. And additionally, they have the global platform to reshape their image, because when we think of Africa, stereotypically and through the media, we think about a continent with a lot of political unrest and poverty. This is their chance to shift that image to one of untapped enterprise and wealth.
And what would it mean symbolically to the people of Africa, a continent that's never hosted?
Well, I think that we can look back to the 2010 World Cup in South Africa, and you saw all the nations coming together in support. They were very just happy to have the world's eye on them and to show everyone that, you know, Africa is now in a place that we have what it takes to host a huge sporting event.
You talk about some of the, your client rather talks about some of the costs and dangers, sort of, you know, failures of the past Olympics. How could Africa avoid those?
So I assume you're referring to the white elephants. There's been a lot of media circulation of pictures of Sarajevo and their sporting facilities that have gone to ruin. And one of these issues is the fact that individual countries need to work on, you know, planning ahead to convert sporting facilities into facilities that can be used by their citizens. And one good example is the 2008 Beijing Olympics. The Bird's Nest is now a grounds for, you know, live theater and sporting events. And the Water Cube is also currently a huge swimming pool and water park.
What about the facilities that were built in South Africa for the 2010 World Cup? Are they being used? Was that a good investment for the country? Would they be able to be used again? I mean, you seem to be, Jacques Rogues, your client, seems to be advocating that it should not be held in South Africa. Is that right?
I think, I believe that Jacques is saying that South Africa does have the infrastructure and the sporting facilities at the moment, but we should also look at other African countries that also meet the qualifications and encourage them to make a bid.
But wouldn't it make more sense to do it where the infrastructure already exists?
That is true, but we have to remember South Africa is where they are in terms of being primed to host an Olympic game because they were awarded the World Cup in 2010, and that's put them to the place where they are. The Olympics is on a much more grand scale, and this would give other African countries the chance to be at a point where South Africa is in terms of their economy and infrastructure.
Well, you mentioned Morocco, Egypt, and Algeria seem to be some other options that are mentioned. Egypt, for example, let's take that, is now in the midst of political turmoil again. I mean, would these countries be ready to host an event like this?
I think these studies were measuring just in terms of space and infrastructure that they are able to. But of course, through our process, which is 2 rounds and continuous voting, they'll be able to see that, you know, Egypt is not going to make the political qualifications for it to be able to host.
And what about, I mean, take South African crime, very high crime rates. Do you see these other kind of social, you know, issues being an obstacle to a country like South Africa or another African country winning the bid?
I think that crime is something, a lot of these issues are global issues that every country has to face, and bringing the games would also bring the world's eye onto a country, and it will also bring awareness to these issues. Hopefully within development there will be measures taken that can help alleviate these problems.
Okay, thank you so much. Really
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, that's over.
Take that off.
I'll do it.
Is that it? Yep, I think we're done.
Okay.
Great, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.
Do you want to play it back right now into the thing?
I don't think so, because we don't really have enough time. It went a lot more quickly than I thought. Often there's some kind of a snafu. So here, let's go in there.
I'll stop recording, and I'm sure Jim will
Yeah.
get it to us, some file that you need.